But now I want to turn our attention to what is happening in India, because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in New Delhi for the G20 summit this weekend, alongside leaders from around the world, including the world's most powerful economies, minus the presidents of China and Russia. Trudeau will spend most of the day sitting in session with other leaders. Some he will meet on the sidelines, like UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and India's leader Narendra Modi has agreed to meet Trudeau in an informal conversation for 10 minutes tomorrow. So we will be watching for that. The Prime Minister's office has accused India of interfering in Canadian politics. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister has announced a new G20 declaration on the language to describe the war in Ukraine. CBC News' Salima Shivji is in New Delhi with what we know so far.
Well, this was announced quite suddenly by the G20 hosts here, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who basically said that he had good news to share, sort of breaking out of a session to share this news, saying there was good news and that a consensus had been reached and a joint declaration agreed upon. Of course, that is the goal of every G20 leaders summit, and it was looking rather unlikely going into this one that it would be easy to reach a consensus. So he did say that he had that good news, and he thanked his Sherpa, his negotiators, and his ministers for bringing about some sort of consensus. We don't have that many details as to the language that was chosen to describe the war in Ukraine, which is, of course, the major division between certain countries such as Russia and China, opposing stronger language, denouncing, obviously, the war in Ukraine. So we don't know what sort of language is been agreed upon for this joint declaration, whether it has been watered down, what sort of compromises have been made. But even the fact that there is some sort of consensus and a joint declaration was looking quite unlikely. So this news came as rather a surprise for many analysts looking into this leaders summit going into it, particularly that it came today on Saturday, not on the second day of the summit tomorrow. A lot of people were assuming that this would take a lot more negotiation. But the Indian officials behind the scenes were really working very hard to get to some sort of consensus, negotiating hard with a lot of their counterparts, and it appears to have paid off.
Salima, we know earlier the Prime Minister of India officially invited the African Union to join the G20. What does this mean for the AU?
Yeah, it's a big deal for the African Union. Obviously, it means that they're at the table of the G20 grouping, of course, of the world's most powerful nations and largest economies. It also means that the African Union, a member bloc which has, a regional bloc that has 55 member states, has the same, status as the European Union, for example, also a member of the G20. So it is a big deal in terms of bringing the voice and the issues of developing nations to the table. They can advocate for solutions for some of those issues, and it is also was also one of the main priorities for India going into this G20 Leaders Summit as well. They are trying to position themselves as the voice for the Global South and bringing those issues that affect developing nations to the table in terms of, for example, climate financing, debt relief. So this is another win for India in cementing their role as somebody who can really bring some sort of consensus and bring other voices and other issues to the table and making the G20 more inclusive and more representative.
That is the CBC's Salima Shivji in New Delhi.